They said she had just married the poorest man in Black Hollow. But by sunrise, she would learn some men live poor because they are guarding something money cannot buy. The morning Abigail Mercer chose Silas Creed, the whole town watched like it was a mistake happening in slow motion. No church bells rang. No long guest tables. Just a quiet preacher, a dry wind moving dust across Main Street, and a man in a weather-worn buckskin coat standing like he didn't quite belong to the world below the mountain. Silas Creed owned nothing folks could measure. No bank account anyone knew of. No cattle brand. No proper house inside town limits. Just a small timber cabin about 6 miles up Black Hollow Ridge where the fog liked to sit heavy even in summer. People said he trapped game, sold hides when he had to, and spent the rest of his time walking the high trails like he was listening to something nobody else could hear. Abigail's friends had tried to talk her out of it. A Mercer girl could have married a banker, a railroad surveyor, maybe even a state man from Carson City. Instead, she chose the man people nodded at politely, but never invited to supper. When the vows were done, Silas didn't kiss her like a showman. He just took her hand like it was something steady and said quietly, "We should start up before the clouds roll back in." That was the first strange thing. Not go home. Not go celebrate. Start up. His horse was an old roan with a faded saddle blanket stitched by hand, but the animal moved like it had carried important riders before. They followed a narrow trail that climbed past juniper and granite outcrops, the town shrinking behind them until the buildings looked like matchboxes scattered in the valley. Abigail noticed things she hadn't before. Silas rode straight-backed, not like a drifter, but like someone taught young how to carry responsibility. His words were few, but when he did speak, his voice had the careful weight of a man who chose each sentence like it mattered. Around his neck, partly hidden beneath his shirt, something silver caught the light once. A key, maybe, or a symbol. She didn't ask. About 3 miles up, they passed 3 riders coming down. That was the second strange thing. Each one tipped his hat. Not to her. To Silas. Not friendly either. Respectful. Like men acknowledging a boundary. Silas gave only the smallest nod back and kept riding. The air grew cooler as they climbed. Pine replaced sage. Wind replaced town noise. Somewhere above the tree line, clouds hung low enough to look like they were resting on the ridge itself. After a long, quiet stretch, Abigail finally asked, "Why me?" Silas didn't answer right away. The trail narrowed to barely 4 feet wide with a long drop into blue shadow on one side. Finally, he said, "Because you chose before you knew. Most folks only choose after they see what they get." She didn't fully understand that. Not yet. Near sunset, they reached the cabin. It was small, maybe 20 feet across, built from hand-cut beams, nothing fancy. But inside sat things that didn't belong to a poor trapper's life. A brass compass, old leather-bound books, a map drawn careful and precise across an entire wall. And that was when Abigail began to understand something simple and unsettling at the same time. Some men hide wealth, others hide purpose. And Silas Creed, the man she had just married, was very carefully hiding something far bigger than either. Morning came slow on Black Hollow Ridge, the kind of pale gold sunrise that touched the tops of the pines first and left the valley below buried in shadow. Abigail woke to the smell of coffee already warming over a small iron stove and the quiet sound of Silas moving outside, his boots stepping across frost-hardened ground with the steady rhythm of someone used to rising before the sun. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw the rough timber ceiling above her and remembered she had chosen this life without fully understanding it. She stepped outside and found him repairing a leather strap on his saddle with careful hands. His fingers moved with surprising precision, more like a craftsman than a wanderer. Below them, the town looked small and harmless in the morning distance, smoke rising from chimneys like thin gray threads. Up here the air felt different, cleaner, like it had not yet learned the weight of gossip. Silas handed her a tin cup without a word. The coffee was strong and dark. "We should not go down for a few days," he said. "Weather is turning." Abigail looked at the clear sky. Not a cloud threatened the blue. That was the third strange thing. He seemed to measure weather by something other than sight. As the morning stretched, she began noticing more details that did not match the story people told about him. His cabin might have been simple, but everything inside had a place. His tools were clean. His books were marked with small notes written in careful script. One shelf held ledgers filled with numbers and dates going back years. Not the kind of records a poor man usually keeps. Around midday, a hawk circled overhead. Silas stepped outside and watched it like a man reading a message. Not today, he murmured softly, almost to himself. Abigail pretended not to notice. Instead, she traced her fingers along the large map fixed to the wall. It showed ridgelines, streams, and passes that did not appear on any town survey she had ever seen. One trail was marked only with a small silver symbol shaped like wings. When she asked about it, Silas only said, "Old paths. Some roads are not meant for traffic. They are meant for memory." That afternoon, a thin fog began rolling down from the upper peaks, even though the air remained warm. Silas secured the shutters and checked the door like someone expecting visitors he did not speak about. Just before dusk, Abigail heard something from the tree line. Not voices. Movement. Soft and deliberate. She stepped toward the window, but Silas gently placed his hand against the frame, stopping her. "They are only making sure I am still here," he said. Not threatening. Not afraid. Certain. "Who is they?" she asked. He did not answer directly. Instead, he said, "There are places in this country that stayed decent because nobody sold the road leading to them." His eyes moved toward the clouds gathering along the upper ridge, glowing pink in the falling light. "My father used to say a man is not measured by what he owns. He is measured by what he refuses to give away." Abigail studied his face then, really studied it, and for the first time she saw something beneath the quiet surface. Not poverty, not loneliness, burden. The kind a man carries when he is the last person left who remembers why something matters. As night settled over the mountain and the first stars pushed through the dark, Abigail realized she had not married a mystery. She had married a promise. And whatever waited above those clouds was beginning to feel less like a story and more like a truth waiting for the right hour to be seen. The third morning brought a silence that felt different. Not empty. Waiting. Abigail noticed it before she even opened her eyes. The wind had stopped. The usual whisper of pine branches against each other was gone. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. When she stepped outside, the clouds had dropped lower than before, hanging barely 200 feet above the upper ridge like a ceiling made of pale silver. Silas was already awake, standing at the edge of the clearing, his posture straight, his hands resting calmly at his sides like a man expecting an answer to a question he had asked a long time ago. "Is this the weather you meant?" Abigail asked quietly. He nodded once. "It only happens a few times each year." His voice carried something new now. Not secrecy. Readiness. He walked back inside and reached beneath one of the floorboards, pulling out a narrow wooden box Abigail had not seen before. Inside rested the silver object she had glimpsed before. Not just a key. A long, carefully crafted piece of metal shaped like a feather with small engraved lines running along the spine. It caught the morning light with a soft glow instead of a sharp shine, like something made to last generations instead of years. "My father gave this to me when I was 12 years old," Silas said. "He told me a door is only a door if you know why it was closed." Abigail did not interrupt. Something in his tone told her this was not a story meant to be rushed. "Most people think wealth is something you dig out of the ground," he continued. "Gold, silver, land. But the rarest thing in this country is a place that has not been ruined by wanting more than enough." He closed the box again and tied the leather cord around his neck, placing the silver feather beneath his shirt. Just then a sound reached them through the trees. Not footsteps. Not voices. A single bell tone. Clear. Distant. Hanging in the air for several seconds before fading into the fog. Abigail felt a chill move across her arms despite the mild temperature. "What was that?" she asked. Silas allowed himself a small breath that almost sounded like relief. "Permission," he said. He stepped toward the trail leading higher up the mountain, the one path Abigail had noticed he had never taken until now. It was narrow, no more than 3 feet wide in places, lined with stone markers worn smooth by time. As they began walking, Abigail noticed something else. Symbols carved into the rocks every few yards. Not letters, not numbers. Markings that looked older than the town below. About half a mile in, the fog thickened until the world behind them disappeared completely. Abigail stopped once, instinctively reaching back as if she could still see the valley. She could not. Only white quiet. "Do not worry," Silas said gently. "You only feel lost when you measure distance the wrong way." They walked another quarter mile before the trail ended at a wall of stone rising nearly 40 feet high. No door. No opening. Just smooth granite with one narrow vertical seam barely visible. Abigail looked at him, confused. Silas stepped forward and placed his hand flat against the rock like greeting an old friend. Then he removed the silver feather and slid it carefully into the seam. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the sound came. Not mechanical. Not loud. A deep shifting breath of stone moving against stone, like the mountain itself deciding something. The seam widened slowly, revealing a narrow passage filled with soft, glowing mist. Silas did not step through yet. Instead, he looked back at Abigail, not asking if she trusted him, only making sure she understood this was a choice that could not be undone by simply walking back downhill. Beyond this, he said quietly, is the reason I had to become a man nobody would envy. Abigail looked past him into the glowing passage, then back at the man she had married, and without hesitation, she stepped forward beside him. The passage did not feel like a tunnel. It felt like stepping into a breath held for 100 years. The air inside was cool and carried the faint scent of cedar and cold stone, the kind of smell that belonged to high places untouched by roads or rails. Abigail noticed the light first. It did not come from lamps or torches. It seemed to filter down through narrow cracks. Far above, falling in soft white beams that turned the mist into something almost alive. Their footsteps echoed gently along the stone floor, not hollow, but deep, like the mountain itself was listening. Silas walked with quiet certainty, not searching the way a stranger would, but returning the way a man does when he knows every turn by memory. After about 100 yards the passage widened, opening onto a narrow ledge that made Abigail stop without thinking. The clouds were no longer above them. They were below. A wide sea of white stretched out like a frozen ocean, glowing under the late morning sun. Peaks of distant mountains rose through the cloud layer like islands. And resting between two towering ridges was something she could not have imagined even if she had tried. A valley hidden between the sky and the earth. Wooden homes built along terraces cut into the mountain. Stone walkways connecting gardens and water channels. Wind wheels turning slowly. Smoke rising from chimneys in calm straight lines. Not a city of gold. Not a fortress. Something quieter. Something older. A place built by people who intended to stay. Abigail forgot to speak. Silas did not interrupt her silence. My grandfather called it Highvale, he finally said. Most people who live below the clouds think it is only a story told to keep children curious. Abigail watched figures moving far below. Men and women dressed plainly, tending crops, repairing fences, carrying water like any frontier settlement. Yet something about the way they moved felt different. No hurry, no fear, no one looking over their shoulder. How many people live here? She asked softly. 237 as of last winter, Silas answered. Every name recorded. Every birth remembered. As they descended the narrow switchback trail, Abigail noticed something else. At the entrance to the lower path stood 3 people waiting. Not guards in the way towns use guards. No rifles raised. No challenge shouted. Just 3 individuals standing straight with hands folded in front of them. When Silas approached, each placed a hand over their heart and bowed their head slightly. One older woman with silver hair spoke first. You took longer than your father did, she said with a small knowing smile. Silas answered gently. I needed to be certain. Her eyes moved to Abigail, studying her not with suspicion, but with careful hope. And are you certain now? She asked. Silas looked at Abigail, not proudly, not possessively, simply honestly. Yes. The woman nodded once like a door quietly closing behind a long journey. She stepped forward and placed something into Abigail's hands. A small carved token made of pale wood shaped like the same feather as Silas's key. Then welcome, she said softly. No one is brought here by accident. Abigail felt the weight of the small carving. It weighed almost nothing, yet it felt heavier than anything she had ever been given. As they continued walking into the hidden valley, Abigail realized something she had never understood before. Some places are hidden because they are weak. Others are hidden because they are worth protecting. And the man she had married had not been hiding from the world below. He had been standing between it and this one. Abigail spent the first afternoon in Highvale walking slowly, not because anyone told her to, but because everything seemed to deserve time. The paths were made of flat stone worn smooth by years of careful footsteps. Small irrigation channels carried clear mountain water beside rows of late summer crops. Apple trees bent slightly under the weight of fruit. A boy no older than 10 tipped his hat to Silas as they passed, not out of fear, but out of the kind of respect usually given to teachers or elders. That was when Abigail understood something else. Silas was not important here because of power. He was important because he belonged. An older man repairing a wooden railing straightened when Silas approached. His beard was white and his hands were marked by decades of weather and work. "Your father used to check that joint every fall," the man said, tapping the railing. Silas ran his hand along the same wood grain and nodded. He said if something small fails, something big follows. The old man smiled faintly. He also said you would come back when you were ready to carry what he carried. Abigail listened quietly. Nobody here spoke in riddles to sound wise. They spoke like people who had learned patience the hard way. Later, Silas brought her to a modest house near the center of the valley. Not large, not decorated, but built with care. Inside, the walls held maps, journals, and framed documents older than the town below. One paper showed signatures, dated almost 70 years back, agreements between families to protect the valley from outside claim. Abigail noticed one name written carefully at the bottom. Creed. Silas noticed her noticing. "My family never owned this place," he said. "We were trusted with it." He opened a drawer and removed a leather journal worn smooth from years of use. Inside were entries written in different handwriting across generations. Weather patterns, birth records, harvest notes, decisions made together. No mention of profit, only survival and balance. Abigail turned one page and saw a final entry written in firmer ink. Silas's father's hand. One sentence stood alone. "If the wrong men find the road, everything gentle here becomes temporary." Abigail closed the book slowly. Outside, a bell rang once from somewhere near the far terraces. Silas looked toward the sound. Not alarmed. Alert. "Visitors are not expected," he said quietly. A young woman approached at a quick but controlled pace. Her breathing steady, her voice calm. Riders were seen far below the southern ridge. Not climbing. Watching. Silas gave a small nod. "How many?" "4. Maybe 5. They did not come closer than the old marker stones." Abigail felt a familiar name form before she even said it. "Gideon." Silas did not answer directly, but his silence confirmed enough. "Men like him do not believe in stories," Silas said. "So they come looking for proof." Abigail felt the small wooden feather still resting in her palm from earlier. She had almost forgotten she was holding it. "Will they find this place?" she asked. Silas looked out across the valley, where people continued their quiet work without panic. "Not unless someone shows them the way." There was no fear in his voice, only certainty shaped by long responsibility. Abigail looked around again at the gardens, the homes, the children carrying water buckets too large for their arms, but smiling anyway. She understood now why Silas had lived like a man with nothing. Because a man protecting something this rare could never afford to look like he had something worth taking. As the afternoon light softened across the valley and the clouds slowly began to rise again like a curtain preparing to close, Abigail realized the real secret was not how Highvale stayed hidden. The real secret was how long one family had quietly chosen to stand between it and the kind of men who only saw land as something to own. That evening the valley did not change its rhythm, but Abigail began to notice the subtle adjustments that came with quiet preparedness. Lanterns were trimmed earlier than usual. Conversations were softer but more deliberate. A few of the older residents gathered near the central well, not to worry, but to remember. Silas walked beside Abigail along a narrow path that overlooked the terraces glowing gold under the late sun. "People think danger always arrives with noise," he said. "Most times it arrives with questions." Abigail understood what he meant. Gideon Rourke was the kind of man who never pushed first. He measured. He calculated. He waited for weakness to show itself. "What happens if he keeps looking?" she asked. Silas stopped near a wooden post where several old trail markers had been mounted like history nobody wanted to forget. Each marker bore a different date, some more than 50 years old. "Then we do what my family has always done," Silas said calmly. "We make sure the truth reaches him before the road does." Abigail looked at him, trying to understand. "Truth does not stop men like Gideon." Silas gave a small, thoughtful nod. "No, but it makes them visible. And a man like him survives by pretending he is something he is not. They continued walking until they reached a narrow overlook where the cloud layer had begun drifting upward again like a slow curtain. Far below, almost 6,000 feet down, the valley town was barely visible. A faint thread of dust moved along the southern ridge road. Riders. Watching. Measuring. Abigail felt no fear now. Only clarity. "Why did your father stay?" she asked quietly. Silas rested his hands on the railing, the same way she had seen him rest his hands on everything he intended to protect. "Because he believed some places prove that people can live without ruining each other," he said. "And he believed if even one place like this survived, then maybe the rest of the world still had a chance to remember how." The words stayed with her. Below them, the dust trail shifted direction slightly. Not climbing. Not leaving. Waiting. A test of patience. Silas removed the silver feather key from beneath his shirt and turned it once in his fingers before placing it back. Not nervous. Certain. "Tomorrow we begin closing the upper markers," he said. Not hiding. Just reminding the mountain which paths are meant to fade. Abigail studied him, then with new understanding. "You were never hiding from the town, were you?" Silas gave a faint, almost amused breath. "No, I was hiding the town from this." A young boy approached then, carrying a folded piece of paper sealed with a simple wax mark. "From the South Watch," the boy said respectfully. Silas opened it and read silently. His expression did not change. "They are asking questions about old water rights and abandoned survey claims," he said. Abigail almost smiled. "So they are not looking for a kingdom. They are looking for land." Silas nodded once. "Men like Gideon only understand value they can count. That has always been our greatest protection." The evening bell sounded again, long and steady, calling residents toward supper. No alarm. No fear. Just a community choosing to remain what it had always been. Abigail realized then the greatest strength here was not secrecy. It was agreement. Everyone understood what mattered. As the sun dipped behind the high peaks and the clouds rose again to hide the valley from the world below, Abigail understood something even more important. Silas had not brought her here to impress her. He had brought her here because the burden he carried was never meant to be carried alone. The next morning arrived with a thin ribbon of frost along the fence rails and a sky so clear it felt like the world had been washed clean overnight. Abigail woke before the bell and found Silas already outside near the edge of the eastern terraces, speaking quietly with 3 of the valley elders. Their conversation was calm, measured, the kind of talk that comes when people already trust each other. When he saw her, Silas gave a small nod that meant more than any introduction. Not welcome, not approval, partnership. Abigail joined them as the oldest of the 3, a man named Thomas Hale whose family had lived there for 3 generations, handed Silas a narrow ledger. "Survey questions are increasing below," Thomas said. "Rourke has been buying parcels along the southern approach. Old logging claims. Water access routes. He is building a legal road without ever touching the mountain." Silas read silently, his jaw still, his breathing even. "Then we answer him the way my father did," he said. "With records. Not resistance." Abigail noticed the words carefully. "Not resistance. Records." Thomas gave a faint approving nod. "Your father always said paper can stop what pride cannot." After the meeting, Silas and Abigail walked along a narrow ridge path, where the morning sun lit the clouds below like a white ocean. "He will not stop," Abigail said. Silas did not argue. "No," he answered. "Men who believe everything has a price usually cannot imagine something that does not." They reached a small stone building Abigail had not seen before. Inside were shelves of sealed tubes, rolled maps, and bound agreements dating back decades. Silas placed the ledger beside others already marked with the creed name. "This is the real inheritance," he said quietly. "Not land. Not gold. Proof." Abigail ran her fingers lightly across one of the older documents. "So you fight him with truth." Silas gave a faint smile. "Truth is the only thing he cannot buy twice." Near midday, a watcher returned from the lower ridge. Not alarmed, just certain. "Rourke has begun asking about the Mercer family holdings," the watcher reported. Abigail felt that settle in her chest like a stone finding its place. "He believes I am the weak door," she said softly. Silas looked at her, not with worry, but with the same steady respect he showed the valley itself. "He believes you are the only door," he corrected gently. Abigail thought about the day she had chosen to marry a man everyone underestimated. She understood now the choice had not only changed her life. It had changed the balance between two worlds. That afternoon she asked to see the southern overlook. Silas did not refuse. From there the land below spread for miles, dry ridges and scattered ranches fading into heat haze. Far below, a single rider moved slowly along the boundary trail, stopping often, studying the mountain through field glasses. Abigail did not need Silas to name him. "He is patient," she said. "Yes," Silas answered. "But patience cuts both ways." Abigail watched the rider for a long moment, then spoke with quiet certainty. "Then it is time he learns he is not studying a forgotten mountain. He is studying people who remember everything." Silas said nothing, but in that silence Abigail understood something had shifted. She was no longer the outsider brought to witness a secret. She had become part of the reason. The secret could survive. The following morning the clouds did not rise. They stayed low, thick as a white ocean pressing against the edges of the valley, turning the sunlight into a pale silver glow that made every sound seem softer. Abigail stood beside Silas near the southern overlook where the watchers rotated their quiet duty. No weapons displayed, no tension in their shoulders, just the steady awareness of people who understood that protection often begins with attention. Far below, the same rider from the day before had returned. This time he was not alone. 3 more horses waited along the lower ridge trail, their riders dismounted, studying papers against the hood of a wagon. Even from thousands of feet above, Abigail could recognize the careful movements of men who believed they were close to owning something. "He is drawing lines," Abigail said quietly. Silas nodded. "Yes, men like Rourke always draw lines first. They believe if they can describe a place, they can claim it." Abigail watched the small group below for several long moments before she spoke again. "Then we show him the lines were already drawn long before he arrived." Silas looked at her with the same calm approval he had shown when she first stepped through the mountain passage. "That is exactly what my father would have said." By midday the elders gathered again inside the stone record's house. Documents were brought out carefully, each wrapped in cloth, each carrying agreements signed by families long gone but still honored. Abigail noticed how each paper was handled with more respect than most people gave money. Thomas Hale unrolled a large survey map dated 40 years back. The Southern Water Corridor was placed under preservation covenant after the drought of 73, he explained. No commercial claim can pass through it without violating state charter agreements. Abigail studied the faded ink and saw something else. Her own family name written in the margin beside one of the original signatures. Mercer. She looked up slowly. "My grandfather helped protect this." Silas gave a small nod. "Your family helped make sure nobody could buy the approach trails even if they tried." Abigail felt something settle into place inside her. She had not been brought here by chance. She had been part of the story long before she knew it. Later that afternoon, a messenger arrived from the lower observation posts. Calm, respectful, certain. Rourke plans to present new boundary filings in Carson City within the week, the messenger said. He believes no one will challenge his claim. Silas looked toward Abigail, not to decide for her, but because he understood the decision already belonged to her. Abigail did not hesitate. "Then he will learn something he has never expected," she said. "That the Mercer name he thought he could use is the same name that can close his road." The elders exchanged quiet glances of agreement. Not excitement, not triumph, just the recognition of balance being restored. As evening approached, Abigail and Silas walked once more along the ridge where the clouds pressed against the valley walls like a protective tide. "Are you certain?" Silas asked gently. Abigail answered without looking away from the horizon. "I married a man the town thought had nothing. Now I understand he was trusted with everything that mattered. I will not be the reason that trust is broken." Silas said nothing after that. He did not need to. The bell rang once across Highvale as lanterns were lit along the terraces. Life continued. Gardens were tended. Children laughed somewhere beyond the orchard rows. And far below, the men drawing their maps had no idea that the quiet woman they believed was their advantage had already become the reason their plans would never reach the mountain. 3 days later, the clouds parted just long enough for Abigail and Silas to make the quiet ride down the hidden trail before dawn, their horses moving carefully along the same narrow path that had once felt like a boundary between two different worlds. This time Abigail did not feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she was carrying it with her. By the time they reached the lower forest, the sounds of the valley town were beginning to wake. A hammer striking wood. A distant train whistle nearly 15 miles away. The ordinary noises of a world that believed it understood everything it could see. When they reached town, nothing looked different. The same storefronts. The same dust along Main Street. The same men standing outside the general store pretending not to stare. But Abigail noticed something she had never seen before. How small the place felt compared to what she now knew existed above it. Gideon Rourke was exactly where she expected him to be, standing outside the land office with a stack of rolled survey papers beneath his arm, his expression confident in the way of a man who believes patience always wins. When he saw Abigail approach, he smiled the way men do when they think they already know the outcome. "Mrs. Creed," he said politely, "I was hoping to speak with you about some family land matters." Abigail did not rush her answer. She let the silence stretch just long enough to change the balance of the conversation. "I imagine you were," she said calmly. Gideon began explaining his filings, his plans, his expectations of cooperation. He spoke of opportunity, of expansion, of progress. Abigail listened without interrupting, the same way she had seen the elders of Highvale listen. When he finally finished, she reached into her satchel and removed several folded documents. Old agreements, water preservation charters, survey protections signed decades before Gideon had ever arrived. Her family name rested clearly among the signatures. "You should read these before you submit anything further," she said gently. Gideon took the papers, his confidence thinning just slightly as his eyes moved across the legal language. Not anger, not fear, calculation adjusting itself. "These are old," he said. Abigail nodded. "So are the mountains." For the first time he had no immediate reply. Around them, a few townspeople pretended to check harness straps and window displays, listening without appearing to. Gideon finally folded the papers carefully. "You understand this changes the conversation." Abigail met his gaze without challenge, without apology. "No," she said softly. "It reminds you there was always a conversation you did not know about." Gideon gave a small professional nod and stepped back, already reconsidering his maps. No threats, no raised voices. Just a man realizing the road he thought was empty had always been closed. That afternoon Abigail and Silas rode back toward the mountain without announcement. No celebration followed. No speeches were made. Some victories did not need witnesses. As they climbed back toward the rising clouds, Abigail looked once more at the town below and understood why Silas had never tried to prove anything to it. Some truth did not need to be seen to be real. When they reached the high ridge and the clouds closed quietly around them again, Silas asked only one question. "Do you regret choosing this life?" Abigail looked out across the white horizon where the hidden valley waited beyond sight. She shook her head once. "I did not marry a poor man," she said quietly. "I married the keeper of something rare." Silas said nothing after that. The wind moved softly through the high pines. Somewhere above them a bell sounded once, carried across the clouds. And in that quiet, Abigail understood the final truth her husband had been living all along. Out here, a man was never measured by what the world thought he owned, only by what he chose to protect when nobody was watching.